Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome. We have many people joining us today from all over the world. So please introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you are located. My name is Susan Wilkin, and I'm the training coordinator at Plum Solutions. Normally, we have a guest presenter, but today our guest is Danielle Stein Fairhurst, principal at Plum Solutions, head financial modeler, plus newly crowned MVP. Now, Danielle, is that your MVP award?
That little thing over there? Yes, that is my new MVP award, which is very exciting.
It is very exciting. So today we have a slightly different format than usual. Normally we run our virtual meetups as a webinar, but this time as a guest, you'll be able to contribute. We'd love it if you could show your video, but please be aware that we are recording this main session today. We are going to jump over to the breakout room shortly, and in those groups, they won't be recorded. So whatever you say in the breakout groups will stay in the breakout groups. So just a little housekeeping before we start is normally there is a Q&A section on the webinars, but today just pop your questions in the chat. To do this, and so that we can all see your questions, just make them to everyone so that everybody can see and that they understand the answers as well. We've got a massively popular session today, Danielle. We're really looking forward to it. And so I will hand it to Danielle to...
Fantastic. I'm just going to share my screen and we are going to get started. So welcome along. I'm so excited to be the guest presenter. Normally I am the person interviewing or introducing other people. So today we'll be talking about budgeting and forecasting in Excel, of course. I am a financial modeler first and foremost, but a lot of the modeling that I do is to do with budgeting and forecasting, and that's what we are going to be talking about. So you probably are familiar with me, but this is what I look like. I have financial modeling is my world. Excel is my world. It's what I live and breathe. I've written a couple of books about financial modeling. So the book that you see me clutching to my chest there is this book, Using Excel for Business and Financial Modeling. I've also written Financial Modeling in Excel for Dummies. We are going to be talking about the training course that we've got coming up next month. This book, the Using Excel for Business and Financial Modeling, is a guide that you can use. It is one of the materials that we use. It is optional. You can get that if you'd like, or it's actually fine to do it without that as well. So what we're doing today is a 1 hour preview or overview of this training course. We ran this in November last year, and it went really well. We did it as a Zoom, as a live Zoom, just like this. We did it for 3 hours a day for 3 days in a row. And we're going to be doing that again next month. So I thought we'd just do the session as a bit of a preview. And those people who end up joining us on the 3-day course, this will become a prerequisite. So we'll assume that everybody's done this prior to coming on that course. So let's jump in. So there are 4 kind of main points that I'd like to cover with you today. Firstly, we'll talk about Excel. So Excel is that we all love using Excel, but we're going to talk about whether or not that is appropriate to be using for budgeting and forecasting. We'll talk about incremental budgeting. Then I've got a practical exercise for you to go in and calculate some seasonality. So seasonality is a really important technique particularly in budgeting and forecasting, but we're going to have a look at how you can actually use historical data to calculate seasonality and then use that for projections going forward. And I have a practical file for you to work together. So Susan's going to pop you into your breakout groups and we're going to work together. So there's 2 sections that we're going to pop into our breakout groups. The first one is going to be a discussion and the second one is going to be a practical Excel exercise. So you will get thrown into a group with other people and you'll have to have a chat about it. And that's exactly what happens in our live course. And then the last thing we'll talk about is accountability and management reporting in budgeting and forecasting. So let's jump into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is using Excel to make our budgets flexible and dynamic. So we love Excel. We often say that Excel is the second best way of doing something. If you are trying to do something specific, like put together a budget or a forecast, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of pieces of software that you can use to use to build your forecasts. A lot of the time, though, we do end up using Excel. It's not the best, it's not always the best way of doing it, but it is so flexible and so dynamic, and it is something that, you know, it has something like 750 million users worldwide. So Excel is often what we end up using. So I would like to, first of all, do a little bit of a poll and find out what people think about using Excel for the budgeting. And I'm talking about the budgeting and forecasting process. So if you go to put together your budget and your forecast, how much do you use Excel? So the answers that you can choose from are: we only use standard Excel formulas, we use Excel, Power Query and Power BI, or do you use a combination of Excel and other systems? Do you not use Excel at all? Or are you not involved in budgeting and forecasting? I assume that you are if you're here today. So I can see the answers are coming in, and yeah, we can see that. Yeah, there's a interesting, this is actually the second session of this session that we've run today. We ran another session about 8 hours ago. And yeah, the results were quite similar, weren't they, Susan? It's interesting. So there's a lot of people who only use standard Excel formulas for their budgeting and forecasting process. So they don't use Power Query, they don't use Power BI, and they don't use any specific software. So that's really interesting. So I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results with you. So you should, if you're joining us on Zoom, you should see the results pop up. So we can see there that 47% of people that are here with us today are only using standard Excel formulas. So Susan is going to pop you into your breakout groups shortly, and we're going to have a bit of a, just thinking about that poll that we just did. So whether you use standard Excel formulas or whether you use other tools in your organization, I'd like you to have a bit of a chat about that. So we've got people joining us from countries all over the world. Like, I didn't count how many, but typically we have, you know, basically any country that you can think of join these webinars. A lot of people are joining us from Australia, but yeah, we have people from all over. So you're going to be randomly thrown into a group. There's probably going to be maybe 5 or 6 people in your group. I'd like you to have a bit of a chat with, firstly, I'd like you to introduce yourself and say, where are you from? Because you could be with someone from anywhere. I'd like you to talk about the tools that you use for budgeting, forecasting and reporting. And then whether you would use or not use Excel for those purposes. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Susan's going to pop you into your breakout groups now.
I'm going to open the rooms now.
Let's carry on. So thank you very much, everybody, for sharing. That was really interesting. There were some really great groups going on there. So let's continue. So we're going to talk now about incremental budgeting. And what I mean by that is that idea of taking the budget of what happened last year. So saying, okay, what happened last year? Let's just roll that forward to next year. We'll say, you know, this is all the costs, the revenue that we had. These are all the costs that we had. Let's just add 5%. And we'll just roll that forward. That's just a little bit lazy. And in fact, it's really not possible to do that now. You know, lessons from the pandemic are really that we cannot do incremental budgeting anymore. What happened last year, I really hope, is never going to happen again. So we really can't just take whatever trends or whatever happened last year and roll that forward. So there's a couple of techniques that I wanted to sort of briefly explore with you, which I think are are quite useful when we are dealing with a very volatile environment. And one of those is to do with we call it flex budgeting. And yeah, not that kind of flexing. I'm not sure what's going. Susan, do you know what's going on here?
I think that looks like me doing a Zumba class.
Did you put this together for me? Yeah, this is the last time I let Susan put together my presentation. I'm just kidding. So flex, the whole idea of flex budgeting is that the budget is based on volume. So we change the volume. So generally you say the budget is the budget. The budget doesn't change. So you spend a huge amount of time putting together the budget, and then the forecast is something that's flexible. So when the budget is static, it really becomes quite irrelevant. So the budget generally doesn't change. And so you're then trying to report, you know, when your volumes have just gone, whoa, like jumped off a cliff, and you're still trying to compare actual versus budget, it really doesn't work. Particularly when it comes to in a manufacturing environment or a unit-based environment. So not a bad idea, not in every situation, but in a lot of situations we find that being able to flex the budget, so putting in the volume as to what it would have been, what the budget would have looked like if we had got the volume right. So that way it actually strips out the variances that are relating to volume. That's really the idea of using flex budget. So it's just something, and in the course we go into a lot more detail. We actually look at how to actually calculate flex budgets, but it's just an idea I wanted to introduce, which is not a bad technique for if you've got a lot of volatility and having to deal with that. The other concept I wanted to talk about is this idea of starting over, of basically having to start from scratch. I mean, last year was a bit, you know, was quite a basket case. And then this year, we really are having to start from scratch. So we are, you know, putting together our budgets and saying, well, okay, we can't use incremental based budgeting. We can't just roll it forward. So we basically need to start over from scratch. And this is the concept of zero-based budgeting, because there's no reason to believe that what happened last year is going to happen again. So because past events are not automatically seen as a target. So the idea or the concept of zero-based budgeting is not a bad idea for certain parts, you know, if you're putting together the budget in certain situations. So the concept of zero-based budgeting is really the idea that the budget for every cost item is initially set to zero. So if you want to add something to your budget, each item or activity has to be justified. There's no givens, and it means that every phase of operations needs to be thought about very, very carefully before we go forward. So there are a few disadvantages of zero-based budgeting. It can be quite time consuming because obviously it's easier just to take last year and roll it forward, but having to do every single line item can be quite expensive and time consuming. Managers that are putting together their budgets using zero-based budgeting can feel quite threatened and insecure because they have to justify their budgets every year. So they have to justify, hey, you know, why are we doing this? Why do we need this project? Why do we even need you here? It's like having to interview you for your own job every year. We do find it works quite well for discretionary areas of expenditure. So things like training or research and development and that sort of thing is quite appropriate for zero-based budgeting. So just because you went on a huge conference to Los Angeles last year doesn't mean that you get to do it again. And just because nobody traveled last year doesn't mean that in the future, perhaps travel should or should not be in the budget. So you're really looking at each line item individually. And of course, it should be undertaken with some sensitivity. So yeah, I'd just like to know whether you guys who are with us today on Zoom, whether you've ever used zero-based budgeting, because I think there's quite a few people perhaps who you may not have heard of it. what zero-based what? I've never heard of it until today, or they've heard of it, but it wouldn't be appropriate. It's not appropriate in every situation, or you might plan to do it in the future, or you might use it every now and then, or yes, we use it regularly. So I can see we've got the results coming in, and I'll just give it another sec, and then I'll share the results with you. Oh, okay, interesting. We've got some quite varied, a little bit different to the results that we got from this poll when we ran this session this morning. I'm just going to share the results with you. And zero-based what is the winner? I have never heard of it until today. So 26% of people haven't heard of zero-based budgeting. So that's quite interesting. Okay. So let's jump to the next section, but I might just check in with Susan just to see whether there are any questions or comments or anything like that before we move on.
No, questions are all good at the moment, Danielle.
We're all good to continue? Great. Okay. So we're going to talk about the seasonality now. So this is the fun part. We're actually going to jump back together into our groups, and we're going to talk about seasonality. So seasonality is often a really cool part of modeling, you know, being able to work out the seasonality and actually having some historical data and figuring out what the seasonality is can be quite challenging. In fact, I did this last week for a client. We were putting together some data, and I said, you know, we need to think about the seasonality, and we were able to line it up, calculate the seasonality, and we found that there was really no seasonality at all. So we were able to do this exercise that I'm about to do with you, and we determined that it was insignificant. But it's interesting to at least do that exercise. So what I'd like you to do might be an idea, Susan, if you haven't already lately, pop that link into the chat again. If you're joining us on the replay, we're going to put a link to this file just below it, so you'll be able to download it. So if you could open up the file called Calculating Seasonality, and I will just share with you what we're going to do, and then we'll jump into our breakout group. So this is what the file looks like, and what we've got here is 12 months of seasonality. You should be able to see my Excel now, and we've lined up. So the data is actually lined up nicely for you into various columns. And what I'd like you to do, first of all, is calculate the average. So we're going to say the average of January is that number there. And we're going to use that number to work out your seasonality. So we'll do that using that number, the average, and we'll divide that using my control arrow shortcut and my F4 shortcut, of course, to anchor that. So make sure you use your dollar sign. So that tells us that on average, January is lower. So 1 is an average, 0.84 means that January is lower than average. So what we're then going to do is use a formula here to look at the total. So the widgets is 545,000. So I'd like you to link to that, divide it by 12, and then multiply it by your seasonality. We're going to have one single formula all the way down. The instructions are over there on the right-hand side. And if you get a little bit of extra time, I have 2 little bonus questions for you. What I recommend, if you get into your groups, the groups are not being recorded. Share your screens because share your cameras, because it does help. And also, if you could get one person to share your screen, if possible, and then you all work together, we find that works best. That's what we do in our courses. And then when we come back, I'll see if there's somebody who might like to share.
Hey,
Welcome back. How did you go? We had some, really interesting groups going on there. Did you have a question, Rajesh? No? Okay. Who would like to share? So I think Cindy said she was keen to share. Are you able to share?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So let me show the screen. Let me know when it gets through.
Yep, just about.
Yeah.
Good. Great. You got the chart working. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe just explain to us how you went.
So what we did was calculate the average for each month in the past 3 years, then work out the phasing, which is the the average of that particular month against the average of all the 36 months. Then you work out the ratio, then apply that ratio to the monthly forecasted sale. Then we work out expected sale of each month for each product. Then we get a total. Then for all these totals, then we get historical and a forecast. Then we transpose the historical into column U.
You used an array formula, didn't you, for that?
Yes,
I saw some people used a hard-coded transpose. I think the array is a better solution. Looks good.
Yeah, array is quicker. So if anyone wants to know more about array formula, is basically you just select, you just block the whole area. There are 12 cells to be transposed, so the target will be equally 12. So we block the whole 12, and we write the formula being transposed. Then we grab the numbers we'd like to transport, close the bracket, and here we do Control-Shift-Enter. Then you get the numbers in one go. So we will repeat this for 3 times for each year. Then the same thing for the forecast. So the forecast is on the column of forecast.
We did that in a separate column, so it shows up as a different color.
Because we thought we thought it's going to be in a different row, different column, but then then this comes with now they are aligned in one.
Because you took it away. Looks great. Thank you so much for sharing, Cindy.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going.
Can I just ask something about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, so you mentioned you do the Control-Shift-Enter. So we didn't do that. We just wrote equals transpose and hit enter, and so that also works, but it's different.
Exactly.
What's the difference?
If you're using Excel 365, it works. So I was just about to show that because so if you see my version, by the way, the completed version is hidden behind. So if you go to the sheet and right click and unhide, you'll see the completed version in there. In my solution, if you're using Excel 365, and as Benjamin mentioned, if you just type equals transpose like that, and then just literally enter, it just automatically does it for you. So Cindy's using a standalone version of Excel, which has got the curly brackets. So she needed to hit Control-Shift-Enter. So it really just depends which version of Excel you're using, but either is totally fine.
Right,
So
okay,
and so what as she mentioned, we just did a calculation there. We used one single formula that went all the way across and down. Now we had a couple of people asking about whether you would hard code that 12 or whether you would link it to here. We say do not hard code assumptions. It's a financial modeling best practice thing is not to hard code assumptions into a model. That you should have it somewhere else, and then you should link it as a hard coded number. Something like 12 months in a year we think is not necessarily a variable, and we think it's okay then to do that. You might link it to the 12, because let me just show you here. I just wanted to draw your attention here to this nice little dip that you see for April and May. So I think we know the reason for that. That is the months of lockdown, and we found that most things dipped quite a lot for that. This is not a bad dip. I've seen a lot worse. So these two here possibly should not be included in your seasonality. So if you decided to include or to exclude those, you might just change that to exclude it. But then if you do that, it's going to mess up there. So it's going to really fundamentally change the way that your model works. So you just need to consider whether you're going to do that. So just think about whether or not you would strip anomalies out of your budget model if you're going to put that together. So we might just move on, because I wanted to talk to you about the concept of rolling forecasts. So In the olden days, we used to just put together the budgets, and the budget used to take so long to do, and we'd put together a forecast, but that would take quite a while as well. And we find now it is so quick and easy in Excel or in another system to put together a rolling forecast. And a rolling forecast is a fantastic way of, looking forward at any point in time, to look forward for 12 months. So I'm going to show you a method of how to do this in Excel. Thing I like about rolling forecasts is that it encourages driver-based thinking. So if you think about you get underneath the numbers and actually think about what's actually driving your model. It is quick to respond and adapt, which is great for forecasts. We have the capability now. Previously, it was quite time consuming to do, but with some of the Excel formulas, which I'll show you in a sec, it just makes it really easy. You just add in the data and it just will automatically roll forward. So this is an example. Now, never fear, I'm not going to jump in and start making you do another really complex calculation, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the kind of things that we are going to do this exercise in the 3-day training that we've got coming up. But I just wanted to show you what it looks like, to give you an idea of how you could put together a rolling forecast. So we do kind of instructions like this. So I'll just show you what the file looks like. This is, we're using some flags across the top. We've got actual, budget, we've got ones and zeros. We often use ones and zeros as flags in financial models. Here we've got our budget. So this is all our budget here. These are our actual. So you put in your actual. Down here, we're going to do a sort of actual/budget. And this is the interesting part. Here, we are using a forecast.ets function. So with that seasonality, once you've calculated your seasonality, it's quite interesting to do some regression analysis to look at the historical data and there's some really cool functions like trend, forecast.ets, and use that to roll forward. And it basically looks at the historical data and uses a linear trend to forecast it out. So we've done that using a forecast.ets. And then that actually, in the end, you end up with a sort of visual, because of course it's always nice to see things visually. So if, for example, you were to grab some data here and let's say, March rolls forward and you've got some data there, you can see that it all just automatically updates. So if there's actuals in there, it will use those actuals to include those in the forecast. So I just wanted to demonstrate that as something that you could perhaps think about as you're putting together your budget. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was accountability. Just thinking about, I suppose budgets have a bit of an image problem. I've done quite a lot of budgeting as part of, I've often been the person to put together the budget, and budgets definitely have an image problem. And this is often because of the language that we use around budgets. So, it's not in the budget, so we can't do it. And just because it's because it's in the budget doesn't mean that we have to do it. And because it's not in the budget doesn't mean we should do it. Or we shouldn't do it. So there's a lot of cultural, within your organization, you probably find there's certain cultural ways that we behave with our budgets. So some of the games that people play, the June spending spree, or if you're in Australia, the June is the end of the financial year. So everybody kind of goes, well, let's, spend our budget, use it or lose it. And so these kind of behaviors are not great when it comes to, really doesn't add value to the organization. So budgeting is a really important part of the process. It's to allocate resources, to measure and reward, and a system of control. Because, which I just wanted to talk briefly now about the whole concept of management reporting. There is no point in putting together a beautiful budget if you're not going to report against it. So management reporting could be seen as a system of control or some sort of guidelines. We think of the cash flow in the organization as the traffic. So you could have, if you didn't have guidelines, the traffic would just go everywhere. Now, each of these cars has got a certain amount of control. They can go as fast as they like, they can stop, they can give way or not give way, but there is a certain system of control, and that is your the road system and the traffic lights and things like that. So we often use driving or car analogies when it comes to that sort of thing. And management reporting is a way of guiding the organization or guiding the metrics or the numbers to get a bit of a system of control or a basis, so that we can see how the organization is doing, because what gets measured gets done. If you can't measure it, then it's unlikely to happen. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions. I know we've already had a couple of questions come through. So just to recap, the budget should be flexible and dynamic. So using Excel, whether we use Excel, whether we don't use Excel, is always an issue. We cannot do incremental budgeting. So we had a look at a couple of different techniques: flex budgeting, zero-based budgeting. We had a look at historicals for seasonality. We had a look at doing that. And then lastly, we thought about the accountability of the budget. So that is a very brief snapshot of what we'll be doing in the course that we've got coming up next month. It's going to be 3 hours, 3 days, 3 hours a day, and we do a clinic at the end. We tried to sort of make it at a time that suits most people. It's across the middle of the day in Australia, so that it suits a few different time zones, or sort of later in the day. You also get 12 months access to the recordings and also to the online support clinic. So we'll send you some information about that if you're interested in doing the course. If you liked the webinar that we did today, the course is going to be quite similar, just with perhaps a smaller group. These are the things that we'll go through, so we'll kind of cover in a lot more depth than we talked about today. So how are we going for questions, Susan? So are there?
Well, we do have a few questions, so
Okay.
I'll hop onto those. But Danielle, you didn't add that course is a lot of fun. It's one of the courses that I actually really enjoy attending as well. So that I'd include that.
I hope you'll be attending it, Susan. You're gonna be driving the breakout rooms for that one.
I will be.
Yeah.
Okay. So Christoph asked, if I use the Excel 365 way without the curly brackets,
Mm-hmm.
and control plus shift plus enter and send it to somebody who isn't using Excel 365, what happens? Does it become converted to an old school array, or does it just get messed up?
No, it won't get messed up. I think it converts to, I might have to get back to Christoph on that. I haven't actually tested it out. That is a good question. I have used that. I have actually sent it to people and it doesn't get messed up, but I'm not sure how. I haven't looked at how it works. So I will get back to you on that one.
Okay, so we had a question in regards to the recording. Yes, we will be sending the recording out to everyone that has registered for today. The next question that we had was Akram's asked, is it possible to consider a forecasting model in table form? Usually we prefer to place the forecast horizontally.
Oh yeah.
It is more readable. However, if you want to use the BI tools in Excel, it is better to have a table. So what would be the best way to proceed?
Okay. So yeah, I think what he's talking about is the way when we did the seasonality, we had it sort of laid out like that, and we had to split it into a table form. Excel does handle tables a lot better. But the way that people read data, we like to see the months across the top and the data down the side. But when we're trying to suck that into the system and actually run a pivot table on it, we really need to flick the data around the other way. And Power Query does a great job of that. Or we can use that transpose thing that we did. So I hope Akram, I'm not sure if Akram is here today, but that was a question that came through. We might skip the second one, Susan.
Sure.
Was there anything else?
Yes, Nauman asked, if we are considering seasonality, when shouldn't trends be important too?
Oh, okay. So yeah, the idea of seasonality versus trends. So what we talked about today was seasonality. So that's the idea of January, February, March. Each of those seasons has a certain seasonality factor, like we calculated. Now, the seasonality doesn't necessarily have to be by months. That's how we did it today. But seasonality could be day of the week. It could be day of the month. It could be, weeks of the year or that sort of thing. So it really depends. And you need to get underneath and understand your data to know what sort of seasonality you might like to include. Sorry, what was the question? Was the difference between seasonality and trends?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the idea of seasonality, is that it's kind of short term, like it might just be relating to the month or the year, whereas trends are more long term. So a trend might go, generally things are going down or generally things are going up, whereas seasonality is kind of up and down. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, and then there was just another one from Michelle that's saying that the timing of the course isn't entirely great. Is there a chance of registering and just getting the recording and the files to work through on her leave?
Yeah, we do that. We have had people do that, haven't we, Susan? It is designed to do the course live, like it's a live session like this, but it's all recorded. You have access to the recordings for 12 months. You get all of the files. You can work through them as often as you like. You also get support. So we do support sessions once a month. So you get to have a one-on-one meeting with me about once a month for 12 months after the course is finished. So you can, if you can't make the time, you could do it as a recording. We have had people do that. All right.
Okay, and Cindy just mentioned to me that she loved the videos embedded in the PowerPoint, and yes, you can embed the videos into the PowerPoints as well, but thank you for saying that. I'm really clever. Appreciate it.
Yeah. You put so much effort recording that Zumba, didn't you, Susan?
The Zumba video, that's all me.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I think that is it for today. I think we are going to sign off.